She sat there, trembling, her small hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair so tightly her knuckles turned white. The glass wall before her seemed impossibly thin, separating her from a creature that could shatter concrete with its bare hands. But Emma wasn't afraid of the gorilla. No, what terrified her was something far more powerful, something that had been hunting her since the day her life changed forever. Her name was Emma Chen, and she was 9 years old when the accident happened. A car crash on a rainy November evening that stole her ability to walk and left her trapped in a body that no longer felt like her own. The doctors said she was lucky to be alive. Her mother cried every night for 3 months. Her father stopped looking her in the eyes. And Emma stopped believing in miracles. That was 2 years ago. Now, at 11, she had learned to navigate a world that wasn't built for her. The stares, the pity, the way people spoke louder, as if her legs had somehow damaged her hearing. The way other kids at school treated her like a fragile porcelain doll, something to be carefully avoided on the playground. She had become invisible and hypervisible at the same time, a contradiction she carried with her every single day. But there was one place Emma had never been since the accident, one place her mother had been begging her to visit for months: the zoo. Specifically, the new gorilla habitat that had opened downtown, a state-of-the-art sanctuary that everyone was talking about. Emma's therapist, Dr. Sarah, thought it would be good for her, a step toward reclaiming joy, toward feeling something other than the hollow numbness that had settled into her chest like permanent winter. Emma wanted nothing to do with it. The thought of going somewhere so crowded, so full of families and laughter and running children made her stomach twist into knots. She could already imagine the logistics, the accessibility ramps, the bathroom stops, the exhaustion. The way her mother would push her wheelchair with that determined cheerfulness that barely masked her own sadness. No, Emma had decided. She would rather stay home, stay safe, stay small. But then something shifted. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, during one of her sessions with Dr. Sarah. They were talking about fear, about how it grows when we feed it, how it shrinks when we face it. Dr. Sarah asked Emma a simple question that changed everything. What's the thing you're most afraid of right now? Emma had expected to say the usual things: walking again and failing, never walking again, being a burden, being different. But when she opened her mouth, different words came out. I'm afraid I'll never feel brave again. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. Dr. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes soft but unwavering. Then let's find your courage, Emma. Not the kind that makes you walk, the kind that makes you live. That's how Emma ended up here. On a Saturday morning in March, sitting in her wheelchair at the entrance of the Riverside Zoo, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Her mother stood beside her, one hand resting gently on Emma's shoulder. They had made a deal. Just 1 hour, just one exhibit. The gorillas. If Emma hated it, they would leave immediately, no questions asked. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of popcorn and freshly cut grass. Families streamed past them, children pulling their parents toward the entrance with unbridled excitement. Emma watched a little girl, maybe 6 years old, skip past her, pigtails bouncing. The girl looked back at Emma with wide, curious eyes before her mother hurried her along. Emma's mother, Lee, squeezed her shoulder. Ready, sweetheart? No, Emma thought. But she nodded anyway. They made their way through the zoo slowly, following the path toward the gorilla habitat. Emma's wheelchair hummed quietly on the smooth concrete, and she was grateful for the accessibility features they'd installed. At least that part was easy. The hard part was everything else. The constant awareness of taking up space. The way people had to step around her. The sympathetic looks from strangers who thought they understood but couldn't possibly. But as they got closer to the gorilla exhibit, something strange began to happen. Emma felt a pull, a curiosity that cut through her anxiety like a beam of light through fog. She had read about gorillas in school, learned about their intelligence, their complex social structures, their capacity for emotion. They fascinated her in a way that surprised even herself. The habitat was stunning. A massive enclosure with climbing structures, waterfalls, and thick vegetation that made it feel like a slice of African rainforest transplanted into the middle of the city. Viewing areas wrapped around the space, some with glass walls at ground level, others elevated for different perspectives. And there, behind the glass, moving through the artificial jungle with breathtaking grace, was the silverback. His name was Keto, the placard read. 32 years old, rescued from a breeding facility where he had spent 15 years in a cage barely large enough for him to stand upright. The zoo had given him a second chance at something resembling freedom, and in return, Keto had become their ambassador, their reminder that empathy crosses species lines. Emma stared at him, mesmerized. He was enormous, powerful, his muscles rippling under his dark fur as he moved. But his eyes, they were what caught her. Deep, intelligent, holding something she recognized but couldn't name. Other visitors crowded around the glass, phones out, children pressing their faces against the barrier. Emma's mother wheeled her closer, maneuvering through the crowd until they found a spot right at the glass. Emma's breath fogged the surface slightly as she leaned forward. Keto was sitting about 20 feet away, examining something in his massive hands. A piece of fruit, maybe, or a toy the keepers had given him for enrichment. He seemed utterly unconcerned with his audience, absorbed in his own world. Then, without warning, he looked up, and his eyes met Emma's. The connection was instant and electric. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She had never felt anything like this sensation of being truly seen, not as a girl in a wheelchair, not as someone to pity or avoid, but as simply another living being. Keto held, her gaze unblinking, and Emma felt tears spring to her eyes without understanding why. Around them the crowd continued their chatter, but Emma heard none of it. The world had narrowed to just her, and this magnificent creature separated by glass and circumstance. Then Keto did something extraordinary. He stood, his full height suddenly apparent, towering and majestic, and he walked toward the glass, toward Emma. Emma's mother gasped softly. Other visitors noticed and gathered closer, pulling out their phones, murmuring excitedly. But Emma couldn't move, couldn't look away. Keto approached until he was right at the glass barrier, so close Emma could see the individual hairs of his fur, the depth in his dark eyes, the gentle rise and fall of his massive chest. He sat down, mirroring Emma's position. Then, slowly, deliberately, he placed one enormous hand flat against the glass. Emma's heart stopped. Time seemed to suspend. Without thinking, acting purely on instinct, she raised her own small hand and placed it against the glass, directly opposite his. The contrast was stark. His hand could have enclosed hers a dozen times over. The raw power contained in those fingers could have torn through steel. But in that moment, Emma felt only gentleness, only understanding. It was as if Keto knew, somehow impossibly, he knew what it felt like to be trapped, to lose freedom, to have your body betray you, and your spirit struggle to survive. He had spent 15 years in a cage, unable to move as nature intended, unable to live as he was meant to live, and yet here he was, on the other side of tragedy, still breathing, still present, still somehow whole. Tears streamed down Emma's face now, hot and liberating. Her mother knelt beside the wheelchair, her own eyes wet, one hand on Emma's back. "Baby," Lee whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Look, just look." Emma couldn't speak. She could only sit there, hand pressed to the glass, connecting with this creature who understood loss in a way no human in her life possibly could. Quito didn't move. He simply sat there, hand to hand with her, breathing, existing, offering something Emma hadn't felt in 2 years: hope. The moment stretched, expanding beyond time, beyond the crowd that had gathered to witness it, beyond the glass and the barriers and everything that separated them. Emma felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been frozen and locked away since the night of the accident. It wasn't happiness, not exactly. It was something rawer, more honest. It was permission, permission to hurt, permission to heal, permission to be broken and still be worthy of connection. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. Minutes, maybe, or hours. Time had lost all meaning, but eventually, gently, Quito lowered his hand. He looked at Emma one more time, a look that seemed to carry a message she felt in her bones. You are not alone. You are not broken. You are still here. Then he turned and walked back into the habitat, disappearing into the greenery, leaving Emma shaking and transformed. The crowd dispersed slowly, some people wiping their own eyes, others speaking in hushed, reverent tones. Emma's mother wrapped her arms around her daughter from behind, holding her tightly, rocking her gently as Emma cried, really cried, for the first time since the accident. "I'm so scared, Mom," Emma finally whispered, her voice small and honest. "I'm so scared all the time." "No, baby," Lee said, her own tears falling into Emma's hair. "I know, but you're also so brave. Do you see that? You came here today. You faced your fear, and look what happened." Emma looked back at the glass, at the spot where Quito had been. Her hand still tingled where she had pressed it against the barrier. "He understood," Emma said softly. "He knew what it felt like." "Yes," her mother agreed. "Yes, he did." They stayed at the zoo for another hour, but Emma kept returning to the gorilla habitat, hoping for another glimpse of Quito. He appeared once more briefly, and when he saw Emma still there, something that looked almost like recognition passed across his face. Or maybe Emma imagined it. Maybe it didn't matter. On the drive home, Emma was quiet. But it was a different kind of silence, not the heavy, suffocating silence of depression and fear. Something lighter, more open. "Dr. Sarah was right," Emma said as they pulled into their driveway. "About what, sweetheart?" "Courage isn't about walking again, it's about living anyway." Lee pulled the parking brake and turned to look at her daughter, this fierce, broken, beautiful child who had survived so much. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, it is." That night, Emma researched gorillas on her tablet, learning everything she could about Quito, about silverbacks, about their capacity for emotion and memory and connection. She learned that gorillas can experience grief, joy, empathy, that they form deep bonds, that they remember. She wondered if Quito would remember her. She hoped so. She thought maybe he would. The next Saturday, Emma asked to go back, and the Saturday after that. It became their ritual, her and her mother, visiting Quito at the zoo. Not every visit resulted in a moment like that first one, but Emma didn't need it to. She had learned something essential that day, something that changed the trajectory of her healing. She had learned that broken doesn't mean ended, that loss doesn't mean nothing remains. That connection is possible even across impossible divides, even through glass walls, and species differences and wheelchairs and cages and all the things that separate us from each other and from ourselves. 3 months later, Emma started writing. Stories about animals who survived against impossible odds, about creatures who found strength in their scars, about a girl in a wheelchair who learned to be brave not by fixing what was broken, but by accepting what was real. Her therapist said it was a breakthrough. Her mother said it was a miracle, but Emma knew the truth. It wasn't magic. It was simpler and more profound than that. It was a gorilla who had seen her, truly seen her, and through his eyes, Emma had finally learned to see herself, not as damaged, not as less than, but as someone who had survived, who was still here, who could still connect and feel and live. Someone who could still choose courage, even when courage looked different than she'd imagined. Someone who, like Quito, had been trapped but refused to be caged. Emma's story didn't end with her walking again. That might never happen, and she was learning to make peace with that. Her story ended with her living again, which turned out to be an entirely different kind of miracle. Because sometimes the most extraordinary moments of our lives don't come from grand gestures or miraculous recoveries. Sometimes they come from a quiet Saturday morning, a hand pressed against glass, and the understanding eyes of a creature who knows what it means to survive. Sometimes courage looks like showing up, like trying, like being vulnerable enough to connect, even when every instinct screams at you to protect yourself, to stay hidden, to remain small and safe. Emma learned that day that fear is not the absence of courage. Fear is the thing courage lives inside of. You can be terrified and brave at the same time. You can be broken and whole. You can be changed forever and still be yourself. And sometimes, when you need it most, the universe sends you exactly what you need, even if it comes in the form of a 400-pound gorilla who once knew what it meant to lose everything and somehow found a way to keep going anyway. That's the truth about survival. It's not pretty or inspirational or easy. It's messy and painful and hard, but it's also possible. And sometimes, in the darkest moments, all we need is one other soul, human or otherwise, to look at us and say without words, "I see you. You matter. Keep going." Emma kept going, and every time she doubted herself, every time the fear threatened to swallow her whole, she remembered Quito's hand against the glass, the weight of his gaze, the message in his eyes. You are not alone. You are not broken. You are still here. And being here, Emma discovered, was enough, more than enough. It was everything. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that courage comes in unexpected forms and healing happens in mysterious ways, consider subscribing. There are more stories like Emma's, more reminders that our shared humanity connects us in ways we cannot always see, and that sometimes the most profound teachers come in forms we never expected. Thank you for being here, for witnessing Emma's journey, and for carrying forward the reminder that we are all, in our own ways, learning to be brave.